Sexual assault, sexual trafficking is no joke. I didn't realize the seriousness of it until I saw Mark Hyman one Friday morning at 5:30 a.m., and he really gave me insights that I was just absolutely shocked. Join us for this special edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. You know, Mark Hyman and I were together recently, and he had told me about his investigative reporting. He's the lead investigative reporter for Sinclair Broadcast Group. And before I introduce this package to you, I just want Mark, welcome him to the show, thank him for his brilliant investigation. And there's Devon, and there's Erinn, and there's Mark. Talk about this package. And
thank you, Armstrong. Sexual assault, rape, is the least investigated violent crime in America. Less than 0.5% of all reported rapes result in a felony conviction. And there are approximately 250,000 untested rape kits in America. This is indeed a crisis. And that leads us into our package.
Let's take a look.
She lost trust in mankind. She didn't understand why no one believed her.
Mike and Cindy Rondini were devastated when their daughter Megan called from college. She'd been raped. But the worst came months later when Megan took her own life.
The bottom fell out. I don't know what hell's like, but it's pretty damn close to that.
The Rondinis believe Megan's case wasn't thoroughly investigated because the alleged assailant claimed the sex was consensual.
She always felt accused. She never felt like she was the victim.
In our nationwide investigation, we discovered a shocking number of police departments dismissed hundreds or even thousands of rape claims as unfounded, in spite of DNA evidence and injuries.
This case, she was at a bar.
Brandon Stahl was part of a team at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that examined about 1,500 closed cases from a 2-year period spread across 20 cities in Minnesota.
Evidence wasn't being collected. Witnesses who could provide valuable information in a case, they weren't being interviewed. Often these cases weren't even assigned an investigator.
The numbers were staggering. No investigator in 25% of cases. A third of the victims never interviewed. And most cases never sent to prosecutors. Even when investigators were assigned, basic steps weren't followed.
When it became apparent that an alleged perpetrator may have been previously accused of sexual assault,
yes,
charged, and convicted,
yes,
they were not investigated.
Correct.
The findings in Minnesota echoed what we discovered after analyzing local law enforcement and FBI crime data nationwide. Rape claims were often dismissed as untrue. Nearly 40% of the police departments we examined closed half or more of the rape cases in 2016 and 2017 without charging anyone.
A lot of times victims would report and they would never hear back from police.
Not all cases can be prosecuted. However, the victims we interviewed and the medical records and data we examined suggest there is a troubling trend in this country when it comes to rape cases. This is why Megan's parents are speaking out.
She didn't want other people to be treated like this. She didn't want this just kind of to go into the circle file and disappear.
I don't have that much time left. I really think I'm only here because I want to see this resolved somehow.
The Rondinis want other victims to get the thorough investigation they believe their daughter never got. For Inside Your World Investigates, I'm Mark Hyman in Austin, Texas.
You know, Erinn Izykowski plans policies and outreach section head for sexual assault prevention. Obviously, there's nothing new under the sun, and when people hear it, we become shocked, we become outraged, and it's very painful. But why is it that we don't seem to have the capacity to do something about it?
Sexual assault prevention is really, first of all, trying to talk about it left of that boom, trying to get before we even have the sexual assault. Most of what we're looking at now is postvention. It's always what happens after the fact, and we kind of Monday morning quarterback this. We go back and try to find, did we miss something or did we blame it somewhere else? But this is not new, that sexual assault in any form, an intimate partner, male on male or male on female, is an underreported crime. It is a deeply intimate conversation, especially if you know your assailant.
Why do, I guess it's devastating for the victim. You look at the parents who lost their daughter to suicide. I guess there's the guilt. And once it's reported in the news, they suffer with that for the rest of their life. And sometimes they cannot handle it. Is there something the parents should have done differently? Is there something that you've learned from your investigation that you could sort of give advice and wisdom to parents of someone who may face this or who are probably facing it now?
You know, Armstrong, it's a really tough issue because when it comes to rape, there are usually two people. That's it. Rarely are there witnesses. So it often becomes, in the minds of many people, a he said, she said. What we did specifically in our investigation is we looked at rape examinations or the sexual assault examination, or it's also called a medical forensic examination, which is a 4 to 6 hour process, deeply invasive, and we used that as a baseline because we thought that would eliminate those cases that people would dismiss as a he said, she said, that if a victim, male or female, doesn't make a difference, young or old, goes through 4 to 6 hours of perhaps the most invasive medical exam you could ever go through, where every part of your body is swabbed and so forth, that they're less likely to fabricate a claim. That means something happened. Whether it was a rape we'll sort that out. So it's a challenging period for an alleged victim to say, I've gone through this event, I've gone through this very challenging medical examination, and now you have people on the outside who can support them and criticize them. It runs the entire spectrum. But they also look ahead to what happens. I addressed it in my opening. So few cases ever end up in the court system. 2017, there were over 1,000 reported rapes in Austin, Texas. One person went to trial. One out of over 1,000. So when a victim, an alleged victim, goes to this, they say, what's going to happen to me at the end? Do I even want to say something? That's a challenge for them. They have to bear that burden. What's the next step? Because the questions come up. What did I do wrong? Did I egg them on? Those are not necessarily the correct questions they ask, but they are natural questions. Was I somehow responsible? That's part of the victim mentality is, did I do something wrong? And it runs the gamut. It's also those people say, look, I was minding my own business and I was dragged off the streets and I was attacked. It runs the gamut. But there is certainly lots of questions to go on. It's a support mechanism, which I'm sure Erinn can talk about, how critical that is. Everything from the outreach witnesses to law enforcement to family and friends are so critical to this process, and that's what has to happen in the early hours or even the early minutes after an assault.
You know, we have Andi Buerger, who is a human trafficking survivor, and she's been in this world of rape and sexual assault. You know, Andi, welcome to the broadcast. You know, what is really frightening about this, if you listen to this conversation, it seems as though the odds are really stacked in the man's favor if they're accused of rape or sexual assault. There's a statistic that 1 out of 5 women are raped and 1 out of 72 men are raped. But if someone is listening to this, the likelihood of believing, and whether you believe the woman or not, whether they're slow in reporting, maybe they forget, maybe there's alcohol or something involved, and when you're doing the forensic evidence, for some reason or another, it seems as though that men all have a high percentage of not being charged with anything, or it never even making the light of day. Andi, your response?
I would agree to some extent, Armstrong, because as we just heard, so many things are not being handled correctly all the way through the systems, whether it's foster care, DHS, law enforcement. You know, the cases aren't getting properly investigated. They're not getting the felony convictions. We have seen national news where somebody with enough money and power doesn't stay in jail even when they've been caught. And so it is a desperate epidemic of non-action. And what I'm trying to say is, even when I went through what I went through from 6 months to 17 years old, being trafficked by all immediate family members and an extended family member, back then they didn't have that term, but I couldn't tell anybody. No one would believe a female child or a female teenager. And just like the kids we rescue, many of them were sent back to the abusers, to the perpetrators, because whether it was law enforcement not believing them or the district attorney or the people like teachers, they just sent them back. And so it's prevalent that, oh, well, you know, it's just a guy thing or a boys club, or it's not a big deal. And unfortunately, victims know that and they feel that.
You know, Devon, do you think guys really understand that they're raping or violating, or they sense some kind of encouragement? What do you think happens in that moment?
Oh, I absolutely think they know exactly what they're doing.
You do?
Oh, 100%. I think not all men are rapists, but some men are, and it's a deliberate act. I don't think it's an accident.
Is it a power thing?
I think there's lots of motives behind it, and I think that's certainly one of them. But I don't think it's, I think they know exactly what they're doing. And there's no excuse.
People who engage in sexual assault are serial offenders, not just of sexual assault, but other crimes. National statistics show that 51% of all people charged with rape, not arrested, or not convicted, but charged with rape, have committed 1 or more felonies. 20% have committed 5 or more felonies. These are serial offenders. They could rape someone today. Last week they stole a car. Next week they're gonna burgle a house. They are serial offenders, and then on top of that, you have a smaller subset of serial sex offenders.
Erinn, hold that point. We're going to take a break. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away.
I don't remember anything after walking to the restroom.
Connie Williams claims she was drugged and raped while visiting Oklahoma City in 2011. She underwent a rape exam in her hometown of Tulsa and was told by an officer her rape kit would be sent to Oklahoma City. For several years, she was assured her case was being investigated. But then in 2017 came the bombshell.
The assistant DA in 2012 closed the case due to lack of evidence.
There'd been no investigation. Connie was told her rape kit was lost inside the Tulsa police evidence room. To try to understand how often this happens, we submitted open records requests to more than 100 law enforcement agencies. What we discovered was troubling. Thousands of rape kits nationwide, never sent to a crime lab.
Even if there's a case that's decades old with very little evidence remaining, it's still worth testing because we need very little material to obtain a DNA profile now. Time and time again.
Erin Sweeney is the lab director at Bodie Technology.
So these instruments that you see here are DNA extraction robots.
It's the largest private forensic DNA lab in America, and we were given a rare look inside. Bodie has processed more than 100,000 rape kits for agencies across the U.S.
People oftentimes think DNA is just used for conviction, but it's also a very powerful tool for exonerating the innocent, and also to link different DNA cases from different crime scenes together to create investigative leads.
Investigative leads that are lost to police departments when DNA is not analyzed. The numbers explain why this is critical. Rapists are often serial felons. Half of those charged with rape have at least one prior felony conviction, and 20% were convicted 5 or more times. We discovered many departments across the U.S. with backlogs, hundreds or even thousands. Others, like Oklahoma City and Washington, D.C., claim they had no untested kits. But we found those cities received federal grants in just the last 2 years, totaling more than $1 million. The Justice Department told us the grants were specifically designated to reduce rape kit backlogs. Over $400,000 in Oklahoma City and nearly $800,000 in D.C. Oklahoma City told us they earmarked the money for property crimes, not sexual assaults. D.C. did not respond to our request for comment. A rape kit can be as important to solving a crime as a murder weapon. And for people like Connie Williams, it took 7 long years before they finally found hers. It was tested just weeks ago, and she was told the DNA evidence is inconclusive. And now she's pursuing more private testing. Connie is speaking up to call attention to a system she believes is broken.
I really cannot think of how many are there like me, because it breaks my heart. I'm not the only one. I'm not special. I'm just being loud.
Nearly 250,000 untested rape kits are estimated to be sitting in police evidence rooms today. But even that number is merely a guess. For Inside Your World Investigates, I'm Mark Hyman in New Orleans.
Now, Erinn, is law enforcement incompetent? Are they inept? I mean, I'm baffled. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, sexual assault forensic exams are even done anonymously, so hospitals have these. There are grants out there that provide them for anonymous victims that come forward and are not ready to talk to law enforcement but want to get their evidence.
But how do you lose a rape kit?
Sir, that is a great question on any evidence. How do you
tell
lose?
us how?
It is a chain of custody that only law enforcement can take.
Is it intentional?
It almost seems deliberate, which is, I mean, I want to believe that's not the case,
well,
but.
So what we found in our investigation is that there are a number of factors involved, everything from social and cultural issues, and then the classic he said, she said, and there are law enforcement who often immediately disbelieve a woman who comes forward.
What does that have to do with her
attacked.
rape kit? In case you come back and find further evidence where you want to go back and look at the crime again.
Well, they've already made the decision that nothing happened.
And so they discard the rape kit? Do they discard it?
Well, they're not supposed to. What they do is they usually set them aside. They don't even send them out to be tested. So we have found, in the case of Washington, D.C., who claims they have no untested kits, but we found $800,000 in federal grant money in the last 2 years to reduce a backlog they claim doesn't exist. So they won't even,
Why would they lie? Why would they just lie to them?
Why would they want the public to know? I'm sorry, but that's unfortunately what we found is we had police departments that told us they had 0 untested kits, and as we continued to press them, they would finally come forward and say, actually, we have 1,000 untested
so
kits.
in the process, Andi, what are the women doing while they're waiting? What torment and further victimization are going on with the women?
With the women, when they have to wait, when they're not getting the respect and getting their voice heard, they suffer the shame, the guilt. Some self-medicate, some go possibly into prostitution because they feel that's all they're worth. And so the system fails. They're hoping beyond hope that something is going to happen. And as we just heard, nothing is really happening.
Is there differentiate for us sexual assault and rape? Are they one and the same?
So rape is would fall under sexual assault. Sexual assault can be over the clothes, abusive contact, no penetration, but rape is going to be the penetrative between either two men, two women, man and woman, but there is different evidence that can be taken in a sexual assault forensic exam when it has to do specifically with the allegations of rape. And that is a 4 to 6 hour, very invasive for men or women to have this done, and they are putting their hopes that, okay, you'll believe me because I did this. Because even abusive sexual contact, you can still have elements of the safe exam done. It's just, it's not going to have that same level of evidence that if you're looking for what's going to be typically found in a rape allegation.
You mentioned something in our conversation on that Friday morning, a particular demographic, the impact on women who happen to be African American. Talk about that, which I was just stunned by.
Armstrong, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of alleged victims, and obviously many don't want to go public, but what we found is you run into these class issues, these race issues in the lower income communities, the lower income parts of town. There is less likelihood to believe the alleged victim. That's true of many crimes, this included. And so when there's also the breakdown of trust. So if a community has less trust in law enforcement, what's the point in going forward and filing a claim? The challenge, and I said a few moments ago, is that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We have some pretty good ideas of what the numbers look like, but there's so many unknowns out there. And the number of women that I had spoken to who had allegedly been raped and filed claims and filed police reports and then underwent an exam, much like Connie Williams in the video that ran, for 7 years, she was told her case was being investigated. They just told her that. They never investigated it. I interviewed alleged victims who had their cases closed days after they were reported, and they thought the case was still open. Law enforcement just closed the case and moved on and just would mollify them and say, we're still working on it.
Well, you know, it sounds like we're talking about the physical rape and then the mental rape. Why would you mislead someone who's hurting and who's been devastating that their case is being investigated and law enforcement who has this Hippocratic oath just like medicine is to uphold the truth. Why? I'm telling you, I'm just baffled. I'm not getting this. It's
well,
not
is
making
it
sense.
because it's because of the nature of the crime? It's the he said, she said, so it's hard to actually investigate and prosecute and honestly get it.
Well, part of it is, in many cases.
But why lie to them to tell them you investigated it when you know you're not? This is more devastating for them. It's just not true.
And that's not within the victim's rights. So a victim has rights, and sometimes what we do find that sexual assault allegations do take an exceptionally long time, especially when you look at, if I'm coming to you and saying, you've been named as a alleged offender, most males are going to then lawyer up. So there is a length of time it takes, but I would be remiss if we don't talk about the fact that there are crime victim advocates in each state attorney's office, each law enforcement's office, each county has people that should be working with these victims to help that right there. If you're not hearing from your investigator because maybe they're overburdened, or you're not hearing because your investigator doesn't believe that you have that this has any merit, your crime victim advocate is just that, to help advocate on behalf. And that sounds like this is another missing piece that we're not using correctly.
You know, I don't want to get caught up in the emotional moment here because it is so emotional. But what percentage of these cases are proven that they were not sexually assaulted, which impacts
I can't speak, and Erinn can probably address this better than I can. I can't speak for all, which is why we focused on the medical forensic exam. When someone goes through that 4 to 6 hour invasive procedure, we thought that eliminated most, if not all, of the, call them the fake claims. Because now there's this, someone goes through this very invasive and embarrassing and humiliating procedure. We thought that pretty much said that something happened. What exactly happened has to be determined. It's what we found in our investigation, and we addressed this a little while ago in one of the videos, is a shocking number of times police departments literally close the cases and say, we've closed it, but they never solve it, if you will. No one ever comes to trial. We interviewed alleged victims in which there was DNA evidence. That DNA evidence led to someone who previously had either been accused, charged, or even convicted of rape, and they still closed those cases and said, we thought it was consensual. Even when the alleged perpetrator was convicted, had multiple convictions, they'd close the case and say, we don't believe a rape happened.
You know, if you heard my introduction of Andi Buerger, she was sexually trafficked and held as a prisoner for a very long time. You think, we talk about sexual assault, but wait until you see this package from our very own Whitney at our station in Birmingham, Alabama, on this story about sexual trafficking. That and much more when we return on this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.
He beat me. He got really graphic about how he would kill me, and then he would choke me and beat me to the point where I would think that he was about to.
Down here against their will. 2 of them had small children. Those children were being held by a trafficker in Memphis while the females were in our town.
4 o'clock one morning, I got a phone call from a police department that's close by about a young lady that they'd encountered in a hotel there.
These girls are sold on the internet, and then their traffickers set up at truck stops and convenience stores and hotels.
Trying to create me like a Build-A-Bear. Like, he would pick the girl and he would tell you how he wanted your hair to look, tell you what kind of clothes he wanted you to wear. I mean, and he gave us all new names.
We know that the average age of entry into human trafficking is 12 to 14 years, and we believe that there are over 2 million runaways in the United States, and within 48 hours of their running away, 1 in 3 of those runaway teenagers will be lured into prostitution and forced to sell themselves. We've also been told recently that 60% of the trafficked minors came out of the foster care system.
Trafficking is not what you see in some of the movies. 80% of the trafficking that you see coming through on our interstates is homegrown. We've only had 1 undocumented alien that was being trafficked through Tuscaloosa, but it does happen. But 80% of the victims are U.S. citizens.
When I was 17, I didn't really understand what was happening to me. I wasn't capable of processing the events that were taking place. I just knew that it was not right. When I was in the college, a girl who we would call a plant today, she was working for a guy who I I guess, groomed her, and then she saw me and invited me to go with her to this hotel to meet this man. And she called him his friend and everything, and then he began to groom me to think that he was my boyfriend. So I'm 17 and I'm meeting this grown man whom looks amazing, dresses great, has this nice car. Doesn't seem like the typical riffraff that you were taught that, you know, to stay away from. So I'm thinking that I'm his girlfriend, and then that turned into him being a ringleader for the folk gang, and he brought in girls to the gang, and then the gang took over whenever I got involved. He backed out of the picture, and their job was to traffic me through the college, traffic me. There was some police, like campus police, who were involved, and there were some coaches and the football team and things like that that were involved as well. I was actually high, and I went to a warehouse where I was auctioned off on stage with other women, and then sent to a hotel where I was introduced to a commercial sex ad site. At the time it was called Backpage, and there I was introduced into the world of how to advertise myself for sex trade and how to learn how to post ads and things like that. And then there were also times where while I was in the room, I was with the trafficker, I would be punished with things like choking and beatings and graphic stories of how he would kill me if I didn't do things, or how he would take my rights away as a mom, or how he would, you know, just basically how he could kill me without ever being caught. And so it made me very scared. And then a guy pulled into the parking lot when I was walking over to a call, and he stopped me and finessed me and pointed out that my situation didn't look good, and that he obviously knew what I was doing. And then he was like, I will help you get off drugs. Do you have kids? And I said, yeah. And he was like, I'll help you get your kids. He built this safety net for me that I hadn't felt if ever, but definitely not any time in the recent events. And so I just jumped in his car. It was just a complete stranger, and I just jumped in his car and thought, well, either this will pan out and be true, and then that will be good for me, or he'll kill me, and then it wouldn't really matter, because at this point I didn't care if life or death took place.
There's all different forms of kidnapping. When you talk about human trafficking, you're talking about mental kidnapping. What is the force, fraud, and coercion? What angle is that trafficker using to make that person do that? It's not going to be the children where the parents are going to call and file an Amber Alert. It's going to be the children that's already, you know, 80% of human trafficking victims have been sexually exploited as children. It's going to be the children that don't fit in. It's going to be the children that's parents aren't going to be looking for them, because a trafficker's not going to want to raise suspicion.
The majority of survivors that we see here at the Wall House were also victims of childhood sexual abuse, and they weren't rescued. They weren't protected from that. So they grow up with a certain amount of vulnerabilities, and a human trafficking trafficker, pimp, you know, whatever term we want to put on them, they're very savvy when it comes to identifying those vulnerabilities in young women especially, and they're able to lure them easier than they would be a child who was not abused and who has a healthy self-esteem. And so that's how they're lured, and they do it very deceitfully. They pretend it's not kidnapping, it's not, you know, forcibly taking them from somewhere. Typically, instead, it's luring them in with a promise of love and affection, and, you know, a shelter, a roof over their head, and clothes and food. And so they're easily lured when they've already been victimized at an early age.
About 4 o'clock one morning, I got a call from Tuscaloosa Police Department about a young lady that they'd encountered in a hotel there. She was not from the United States, but she did travel here maybe about a year prior to start a modeling career. So she traveled into New York, and that's where she met her first trafficker. He trafficked her all the way down to Florida, and he traded her off to another trafficker, in which in turn she ended up in Tuscaloosa. So she was summoned to make about $1,200 a night. So if she didn't make $1,200 a night, she didn't eat. So when they encountered her, she actually hadn't eaten in about 2 days. So the first thing that I told them was give her something to eat, and maybe you would, could gain some trust from her. And so they did that, and about 4 or 5 hours later, we were able to convince her to come to the well house.
I couldn't eat, sleep, or breathe almost. If he could charge me for the breath that I was taking, he would have. It was like I could not do any of the things that I would have basically, what anyone else would normally do without making a certain amount of money. And he would make sure that I didn't. He would come by the hotel and make sure that I didn't take a shower or I didn't do these things until I made this amount of money. That was when I knew it was over for me, and that was when when he got really graphic about how he would kill me, and then he would choke me and beat me to the point where I would think that he was about to kill me. And I got to the place where I was just so numb inside, like I was not even reacting anymore to him. Every time he would put his hands around my neck, I just stopped responding, and it was just like, just go ahead and kill me.
You take a sexual assault victim, a victim of a rape. Now that's a heinous crime in itself. It's nothing that you want to wish on your worst enemy. But if you magnify that one sexual assault, that one rape victim, if you multiply that with a trafficking victim, those multiple victimizations each day, those 10 or 12 men or individuals that they see each day because they're in this life and they're raped forcibly 10 or 12 times a day, you magnify one sexual assault so many times, so over a period of years, it can be years for some of them, that the level of trauma that they're at, a lot of them have bonded to the trafficker, the Stockholm Syndrome, traumatic bonding, a lot of them are bonded to the trafficker, a lot of them have been in it so long that they associate this with love. And it is very hard to break that crust as a law enforcement officer because they're trained by the trafficker not to believe anything that we say and that we're out to get them and that we're out to arrest them, and actually we're out to rescue them actually. But they've been so brainwashed and so traumatized through years of victimizations that it's really hard to get the victims to stay with you until it's time to take this to court. It's really rough.
So, Andi Buerger, this is what we need to know. We need to know where we have made success, we've arrested, the prosecutors have put these people behind bars. I mean, we cannot have a discussion like this and not talk about that these people are just getting away with this free willy, and there's nothing to stop them. So give us some hope that we're making progress here.
I would love to give you some hope, Armstrong, because I'm a perfect example of it. After 17 years, even despite the death threats, the last time my birth mother tried to kill me, I was 17. The first time was well before, between ages 3 and 5. My first suicide attempt was at age 5. And so it was tough. But the hope is, in my life, God interceded. In other people's lives, it could be something else. But I chose every day that I was going to win by living and living forward and making choices that were not those, because at that time, there weren't advocates like you. You were such a strong advocate for human rights, but they barely talked about child abuse, let alone anyone that would take a child, drop them off at Uncle whoever's house, knowing what Uncle whoever would do to them, and then, pick them up later. And so those things, the hope is that what I did with my life, choosing to move forward, getting help, getting counseling, using education as my tool for success in life, getting a law degree, and then years later eventually starting Beulah's Place with my husband to rescue other victims, to pay it forward. And now the ones that we've rescued, who are doing well in life, who are going to college, who have a future and a hope, they're paying it forward. And isn't that what hope is for?
Yeah,
It's to continue.
Yes. what's happening in the courts?
Each state has a very different legislation when it comes to this, but sex trafficking, it's hard because you want to picture this victim in a particular way. You want that perfect victim, but unfortunately, when we know those who are being trafficked, you would ask that the panels and the juries that are watching this look at that person and see who they are, not see what they left at 14 and ran away and maybe they were drinking underage. This is a child or a person who was, all of this was happening against their will. And that's hard sometimes for the jury to look at someone who's put together and sounds great and has nice cars and money, well, and you ran away and you did these things. You've got to step back and really look at what happened after and who would choose to stay in that environment. That's got to be a place where the jury is involved, because the prosecutors can only charge so much.
But I feel like it has to get there, and it's not even getting there. That's the problem.
Oh, sexual assault victims and trafficked victims don't trust what we're telling them. They don't. They want out. If they can get any type of justice, great, but they want out and they want to go on. And then we sometimes in the media we want to then use them like you have a responsibility to come forward and tell people to stop. And that's great that those who can, and there's others who don't want to be that face anymore. They want to go on, and so it's a burden that's the citizens. We have to want to fight this, whether we can put a face to a victim or not.
Well, you know, Mark, I have to tell you, brother, I have a lot of respect for you for doing this story. What were you like before you started your investigation and then afterwards?
Well, certainly it's sobering to find out the sheer number of cases that aren't even investigated, that are just closed, even when there's DNA evidence, even when there are injuries. I want to focus on a couple of issues here. The first step to solving any problem is have a conversation, and that's what we're having. And we have to have the public more they have to really appreciate how big a problem this is. That sex trafficking, as an example, is not something that only happens in certain cities and in certain neighborhoods. You can pretty much walk down the street and you can point out certain storefronts, the fronts for what's going on, activity that's not
really?
That's not accepted. And I won't go into the types of storefronts. We can talk about that off air.
Oh, my goodness.
But it also comes down to priorities. And so for a police department that says, well, we don't do our rape exams because these rape cases, we don't have enough people and time. It's priorities. If you have certainly the most extensive investigations that take the most amount of time and money are murder cases. Yep. We don't ignore those. So it's priorities. Do we have the priorities there? Most law enforcement we spoke to in sex assault units tell us that it's a punishment to be in that unit. That's considered one of the worst assignments to have. If you screw up in the police department, we're going to put you in the sex assault unit. We need to change the priorities and how we focus on these things. So it's not just law enforcement. Prosecutors run on campaigns of how many convictions I have. So if they think they have a case that's not a slam dunk, often with what they might consider he said, she said, they're not going to take the case up. They want to get it off their plate. They want to close it by some other means. We have to have the right priorities to realize you can have a prosecutor who maybe doesn't win as many prosecutions, but brings more of these cases to trial, even if they don't get a prosecution, as opposed to closing them. As we mentioned in our package, the very first package I had, there were cities in this country in which they would close 50, 60, 70, 80, 100% of their rape cases, close them without ever prosecuting a single person. They said the case is done, we're moving on. Dozens, even the hundreds of rapes, they said there's nothing there, there's no there. We need to change that priority.
You know, Andi, is there information where we can learn more about Beulah's House? And congratulations to you and your husband for establishing it. Is there a website?
Yes, there is. Viewers can go to beulahsplace.org. That's BEULAHS place, PLACE.org. beulahsplace.org. They'll be able to see hotline numbers, get more information about my story and upcoming book in September and things like that, and that they can find out more information about what we do in our community and why it's becoming a model across the country.
Andi, Devon, Erinn, and Mark, thank you. And we'll be back to talk a little politics. Don't go away. And welcome back to the broadcast. William Ricciardella, Jason Nichols, and Robert Patillo are joining us. Robert, did the Israeli government make the right decision in denying to leave and Omar denied their visa to visit the country?
Absolutely not. We have to understand the amount of money that the United States gives Israel as part of the aid packages, the amount of military support that we lend them, the idea that lawmakers can be banned from a country that we are giving billions of dollars to simply based upon disagreeing with their policy, disagreeing with them standing up for Palestinian human rights. I think it's abhorrent to our system, and I think the Congress needs to take action to make sure that Israel understands that if you want this amount of economic support from the United States of America, then our lawmakers have to be allowed to go there to speak with the citizens, to go on diplomatic missions. It is not an exclusive club when we're already paying the admission price to come in.
You know, Professor Nichols, I remember during the days of the galleys when somebody was hung by the neck and they dropped them. Even then, it did not assure that the person would die. And interesting enough, rarely did they have a broken neck as a result of it. And when their neck is broken, it really indicates that it was a very brutal death. You take Jeffrey Epstein, he died a day before they started calling the names of who was involved in this, to say that he committed suicide, some saying it's assisted suicide. It's kind of hard to believe, especially when there were so many broken bones, that it was suicide.
No, I agree 100%. It looks very fishy right now. Apparently he wasn't on suicide watch at the time, but still, with the broken bones in his neck, and the circumstances of his death seem very, very fishy. We know that he was connected to a lot of powerful people on both sides of the political spectrum. And I think that we really need a full investigation to see what happened here.
You know, Anthony Scaramucci spoke out this week saying that he was no longer supporting President Trump. Mark Sanford is talking about challenging President Trump in the GOP primary. The different question that I asked, though, is, and there's also been an indication that there's this disruption and there's this storm growing against the president. Does Trump need a challenger? And what does this speak to in terms of the president and his core base?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you can look at Mark Sanford, who's been he's been a libertarian. I mean, that's what he is. He's a hardcore conservative. You can see the national debt's probably bothering him. Trump's trade war, what's gone on in the stock market the past few days, these effects of the trade war that are hurting actual people. I think that's what probably bothers Mark Sanford and why he wants to mount a challenge. Scaramucci's probably doing it more for personal reasons. He wants to get on TV. He wants to be heard. I think that's part of the reason why he wanted to be in the administration. That would go along with his personality profile. So I don't really think I don't think there's a big mounting challenge against the president. Would it be good for somebody to challenge him? Why not? I mean, I think there's some perhaps disenfranchised conservatives out there that care about the same things that Mark Sanford does.
Well, why is it that, I mean, this national debt is out of control? It's just really whopping. They're just spending like there's no, like drunken sailors. Why is it, I mean, when Obama was in the White House, and he was spending in the national debt. I mean, Republicans were railing against the Democrats and President Obama in the White House. What has happened?
Well, I think you have to remember that first day of political science class where they say tell you politics is the question of who gets what when. And now the Republicans are in control, and when they had control of the Senate and the House, they realized, well, since people aren't really motivated and voting based off of debt and deficit and national spending, then why don't we get our piece of the pie also? Why don't we pay off our constituents for for them putting us in power? And now it's gone even further with the 2020 Democrats now just basically saying all economics are out the window. We're going to pay for everything. Everyone gets everything free that they want. They're chicken in every pot, and we're going to continue going this way until we hit the wall and crash and realize that we've gone too far in spending.
You know, Representative Stephen King, who I think sometimes give ignorance new meaning. You know, I criticized him when he said there would probably be no world population growth if it were not for rape and incest, and given the conversation that we just had. But I guess if you're thinking about it from a biblical perspective, obviously there was incest with Cain and Abel. There's no way we would be here today. And if you like Genghis Khan and how he conquered the world, the rape and the pillage, and certainly in the royal family, if you look at monarchies throughout the history, there's certainly incest where they keep it inside the family. I mean, it does exist, but to say that there will probably be no world population if it were not for rape and incest, I'm just, you know, it's so easy to dismiss people. I mean, look at what goes on in churches. In the Catholic Church, these young boys are raped and women are raped. I mean, when you think about it, 150, 200 years ago, they were marrying 12 and 13-year-old girls like 40 going north. And it was perfectly legal. Then today, it's frowned upon and we consider it as rape and sexual assault. So is this something that we should take a look at? just blow him off saying that he's ignorant and just out of touch?
Well, let's look at the media coverage. I think, and I'm not defending anything Steve King said, it's obviously hyperbolic and poorly worded. I wouldn't use that, but I think the media coverage was a bit disingenuous in the headlines that they used, just saying that, we'd probably have no population if there wasn't for rape and incest. What he was really saying is that people, born from incest or rape are people too, and that those, he's trying to defend, he's trying to defend those people against abortion. Aborting somebody who was born via rape or incest. So I feel like a lot of the headlines were a bit disingenuous, even though what he said was certainly hyperbolic and something probably maybe a poor argument. But what he's saying is if you go back through history, if we were to eradicate all the people who were born from rape and incest, where would we be today? That was the question he was posing, as opposed to what the headlines said.
Was it beneath the Speaker of the House when she was speaking to refer to Mitch McConnell as Moscow Mitch?
I think all the traditional rules have been broken. Everything, if you have told somebody 10 or 20 years ago that the president would on a regular basis go on Twitter and get into like a Def Comedy Jam session giving people nicknames and making fun of them, I don't think anybody would believe them. We're in a new day and time. We're in a new political environment. We're in a new social media environment. And Nancy Pelosi is going with the time. She's a 70-plus-year-old woman who wants to, who has a very young caucus. And if Moscow Mitch is trending, then she has to go along with what's trending in social media because she has to hold that caucus together.
I was actually shocked, Professor Nichols, that after, and I do believe, I understand why Chris Cuomo reacted the way he did, but he was with his 9-year-old daughter and his wife. The expletives is just really, to me, was not necessary. I wasn't as shocked as somebody trying to set him up. I was proud of the fact that Sean Hannity came to his defense. But then the president tweets out the next day, well, I thought your name was Fredo.
Yeah, I thought that was, but again, this is kind of what was being said earlier, is that the president doesn't pay attention to, the rules of decorum and things that we have associated with the office for a really long time. He's somebody who likes gossip. He likes to tweet. And it was disappointing, on his part. And at the same time, for him to call Chris Cuomo crazy and say that he was, shouldn't have a weapon and all these kinds of things and not pay attention to the things that he's done on Twitter was also a little odd to me.
Well, he doesn't hold people to the same standard that he holds himself. That has always been the case. Is the economy slowing down? The Fed, the interest rates, it's a great time to buy. Is the economy slowing, and should that be a concern for the White House?
I don't think the economy is slowing down. I think there are things, deep-seated things in the economy that could have an effect, much like the deficit, perhaps on people that may want to invest or spend right now are thinking we're at some point going to have to pay our deficit back, which means that we're going to have to raise taxes, right? This might discourage them from investing. I also think that the tariffs are going to have a huge impact going forward on the economy. I think a lot of people, conservatives in particular, in the Trump administration, don't want to admit that. But I think this is really harmful to our economy. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930 are really a large culprit of what happened at that time. People blame it on the market crash in '29, but it really was the enactment of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs where you saw a massive crash in the economy. These can be dangerous, and they do hurt people. They particularly poor people who buy goods from China that are cheaper and a better value to them.
And for all of us as men, raping, sexual assault of women is unacceptable anywhere. We must do better, especially for our sons and daughters that are yet to come. I'm Armstrong Williams.